the recording now. Okay, welcome to everybody who's joined us. If you're just joining, if you could put in the chat box why it is you're joining the conversation today, that would be a great start. And I'm going to get ready to share. I'll give people one more minute to join us. Hi, if you're just joining us, I just asked if people could put in the chat box what motivated you to join the conversation today, and I'll be getting started shortly. Okay, welcome everybody. For those of you who are new to the sustainability series, my name is Megan Boyce Green. I'm the director at Rhinestone Woods Environmental Education Center, which is just outside of Buffalo, New York. And this is the last in our Sustainability 2.0 series, Becoming a Voice for Climate. I do appreciate those of you who've shared in the chat box why it is that you're here today, and I see a lot of different reasons why people are joining. People wanting to learn how to communicate better, people wanting to teach their students better. Lots of good reasons for joining the conversation today. I would like to say that this is my motivation, which this is my kids and my nieces and nephews. But I also have a really selfish reason for being interested in sustainability and in this topic, and that is that I would like to have a long, stable retirement. And some of the changes that could result from climate change if we don't take action quickly could be occurring during my retirement, so not too far off in the future. And so just a quick refresher, when we talk about sustainability, what I'm really talking about is the need to keep global temperatures from going up beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius. And that means we need to get off of all sources of fossil fuels in a pretty quick time frame. So we've been doing this, offering through Rhinestone Woods the sustainability series to look at the big sources of climate changing gases in our lifestyle. So that's how we move ourselves around, where we get our electricity, what we eat, and what food we waste, as well as how we heat our homes and where we put our money. And then the sixth one that I would add is how we use our voices. And I just want to explain a little bit why this is part of the Big Stuff series. When my husband and I decided to get serious about sustainability a few years ago, we took something called the Ecological Footprint calculator online. It's by this Global Ecological Footprint Network, I think is the name of it. And you can put in a whole bunch of information about your lifestyle, and they tell you how many planets would be necessary if everyone lived the way that you live. And so at the time we started, if everyone lived like we did, we would need 4 planet Earths in order for there to be enough resources for everyone to live the way we live. But we've actually made a whole bunch of changes that have gotten us down to 1.6 planets, which is pretty good. However, on this Global Footprint Network's calculator, you cannot get to 1 planet. And they explain that the reason for that is because a big part of our personal climate impact comes from our society. So from the infrastructure that we use every day, how goods that we consume are made, and how our governments operate. So in order to really get to that sustainable single planet, we need to be looking not just at what we do as individuals, but we need to be influencing others and influencing our governments to make these really drastic changes that are going to get us to a sustainable future. And so that's why I added voice to the Big Stuff series, so that we can hopefully avoid the end. So today we're going to be focusing on how to do this. And there are a bunch of groups out there raising their voices on this issue, including some using some really clever techniques like this poster. This poster was from a group called Countdown, which has an offshoot called Count Us In that some of you have probably heard me talk about before. And so Count Us In tries to help individuals make 16 evidence-based steps that have been shown to make a difference in terms of climate impact. And 3 of those steps involve using your voice. So those include talking to friends, speaking up at work, and talking to politicians. And so today's session is going to be focused on giving you some tools to help you use your voice. As with other sessions, I will be giving you a resource sheet towards the end of the talk so that you can take some resources and hopefully start to use your voice on this issue. So the tools that we're going to go over are first a couple that can help you learn about climate change, what needs to happen in terms of sustainability and what's going on out there, as well as the impacts of climate change on New York. Most of the time we'll be talking about how to talk about climate change and how to think about how you can use your voice to talk about climate change. And then we'll talk a little bit about some specific actions, how to take certain actions that involve using your voice. And doing these things can actually be a real positive for a person. It can help you not just focus on the doom and gloom aspects of climate change, but to feel like you've really made a difference and done something positive. So the first area would be to learn about climate change. Try to get yourself so that you feel comfortable, at least talking in basic terms about climate change and how it's going to impact New York. And I do include some resources to help you do that. And then if you want to get more involved and learn about what's going on with climate change in a larger setting, you can use sources like the Yale Climate Connections. This is a program that puts out a newsletter that you can get daily or weekly that just includes links to stories and information about different things happening related to climate change, the research related to it, but also solutions and what's going on in terms of trying to make positive changes. There's also an organization called Grist, which is a news organization that focuses on climate change. It's a nonprofit news organization, and they put out something called the Beacon, which I really like. It's a one day, every day they put out this quick newsletter, and it has something positive that's happening related to climate. So yesterday's headline was, it's Wednesday, March 30th, and New Jersey is saying goodbye to its last coal plants. And then underneath that main story, there will be links to a few other stories as well. So that's a nice, easy source of climate information to get. Another thing to do if you don't prefer to read via email or online articles is, if you're a social media person, there are organizations out there that you can follow that will give you good information related to what's going on with climate change. The UN Climate Change Conference that happened last fall, for example, you could follow, and then you can also share to your own social media anything that you see that you think is particularly important for people to know about, or particularly inspiring for people to know about. So some of these resources are on the resource sheet for you. But then the next step is going to be talking. The most important thing we can do right now is to talk to anybody and everybody we know about climate change. So the first step really is to think about who is in your circle of influence. And so some of that might seem obvious, like your friends and your family, but thinking more broadly about what organizations are you involved in? Where do you go to church? Are you involved in a sports team or a neighborhood association or a social club? The people you work with, where you work, any professional associations that you belong to. Are you really active on social media? You may be having the potential to influence a lot of people if you have a lot of followers, if that's a space that you're very active in. And so I had asked everybody to bring a piece of paper and a pencil with them today, because I'd like to take just 60 seconds, and I will time it, to have you think about who is in your circle of influence. So you can just put your name or put me in the middle of the piece of paper, and then start to think about and write down who is in your network, who is in your circle of influence. So I'm going to just time us. So go ahead and start thinking and writing right now. Got about 10 seconds left. Okay, hopefully everybody can hear my duck telling us that we went a full minute. Okay, so hopefully you've got some names or some organizations written on your piece of paper. If anybody has any comments or anything they'd like to say about this at this point, feel free to share it in the chat. I'm going to go back to my slides though and start to talk about what you can do now that you have this initial information. How would you go about talking to the people in your network about climate change? So there's a lot of information out there that gives advice on how to go about talking to your network about climate change. And most of the research that's out there has come back to basically three main points in terms of how to talk. And the first is to tell your story of climate change. So people tend to react better to stories than to facts and figures. It's hard for me because I was trained as a scientist. I tend to respond to statistics, but most people don't. Most people would rather hear a story. So for example, a good friend of mine who lives in New Jersey sent me this picture back when Hurricane Ida hit the East Coast. This was her neighborhood in New Jersey, and her favorite restaurant is actually in this building here. And it was unfortunately in the basement of this building. And because this location is 30 miles from the ocean, none of the businesses in this building were eligible for flood insurance. And so the ones that were in the basement basically lost everything. So telling stories like that can be much more powerful than just saying, hey, did you know New York State is going to get a lot more floods in the future because of climate change? So thinking about your story, and I'm going to give you a resource, a tool that can help you figure out what your climate story is as well. The second thing is think of something, a value that you share with whoever you want to talk about, and something that they care about that you also care about, and how climate change impacts that. So what you share could be something as simple as you're both parents, you both like sports. Sports are gonna and already are being impacted by climate change. But let's say you have some drinking buddies. So you could talk to them about the German hops industry. So a lot of hops is grown in Germany, and climate change is impacting Germany's ability to grow hops. And so they're actually predicting that there's going to be a shortage of German beer because of climate change. So bringing up those kinds of things, sharing that with your network can be a way to connect and have a productive conversation about climate change. And then the third step that the research tells us is really good if you're going to have these conversations is to offer whoever you're talking to a chance to act. So this is where you would share information that you've learned through this sustainability series, like, hey, I brought a plant-based lunch today, or hey, I just switched my electricity provider and now I'm getting it from a community solar project, that kind of thing. So sharing solutions and ideas is the third way to make it be a really productive conversation. So some examples of things that you could do to help connect with groups. One is if you belong to a book club, you could suggest that you read a book related to climate change and then have a discussion about it. If you belong to a social club, a lot of social clubs own buildings. So you could talk to them about where they get their electricity, because changing that to something sustainable might even save the organization some money. If you belong to a church, there are a lot of faiths that already have some sort of organization that is helping individual churches or parishes or synagogues, whatever, make changes to make their operations more sustainable and to educate their participants about sustainability. So I'm going to give myself as an example. When I did this exercise of thinking of my circle of influence, the first thing I thought of was a couple of women's groups that I belong to. I also belong to a professional association. I have a bunch of college friends that I talk to on a regular basis. And I also have friends that we camp with. I volunteer at a church association run store. So I started to think about, how could I have some conversations within these groups? And one of the things that I thought of was this women's group that I belong to owns a building. And so I've been talking with them about switching to getting their electricity from community solar, which is probably also going to save the organization money. So starting to use this idea of thinking about your sphere of influence and then figuring out what kinds of conversations you could have with them can be a useful exercise. So again, the idea is tell your own story of climate change, find something of value, and then offer them a chance to act. Does anybody want to share? Maybe I'll stop sharing my slides for a second. Share what you are, what you might be thinking about this particular topic, exercise. Has anybody tried to have these conversations, and have you had any luck or not luck? June, I see you raising your hand. You can unmute and talk if you'd like.
Good afternoon. I belong to a friend's Quaker church in Orchard Park, and it's a very small group, but we have taken on some things to help us be more aware of climate change. We are currently, we bought a composter, and we are asking all the people in our church to bring their, appropriate compost. We've been doing that for over a year. We also have a rain barrel. We're pretty careful with our electricity and our heat. Our meeting is in a very old building, but I will bring up the possibility of using solar electricity, because I don't think we've taken that step. But we've done some very small things that have in fact saved us money, but we also know it's good for the earth, and that's a big part of the Quaker faith, sustaining the earth. So
wonderful.
There is also a conference this weekend, tomorrow or Saturday, in East Aurora, with a group of churches that are meeting to discuss the environment and climate change. So if anyone would like information about that, I could probably send some.
Great. Yeah, even if you want to share that with me afterwards, I could send it out to the whole group. That would be great. Yeah, thank you. Okay, anybody else? Maddie, I see somebody put something in the chat. I don't know if you want to share whatever that is.
I didn't see anything in the chat on my end.
Oh, okay, sorry, I'm showing something. Somebody asking, where do we get info about community solar? We live in the city of Buffalo. So that's something I could share with you afterwards. And I will also be mentioning, we're going to be repeating the Sustainability 1.0 series that will include a whole session on electricity, but I can give you just specifically some links to information about community solar after this talk. So great. Anybody else want to share? Terry, I see your hand raised.
I belong to a garden club, and we started what we call an environmental group. And I'm on the committee, the head of it. And so I'm always looking for ways that people can do things in everyday life, you know, what they can recycle. I just found out, I'd share with everyone, if you live in the area, Mishler's is a garden center in Williamsville, I think, but they recycle like all the little pots, the trays that you get pots in. It says their own, but I thought, how are they really going to know if it's their own or not? But we, as gardeners, and we sell plants and all kinds of things, you know, use a lot of those, and those don't really go in the recycling bin. So if we can find a place like that, I'd love to share that information. So we're trying to find some really, you know, easy things that everyone can do. And I always offer to collect, you know, things, bring them to the meeting. I will take them, you know, if people live all over. Another thing I just wanted to share is I'm not sure if I found it on through you, is they save empty toothpaste tubes and toothbrushes at a place, you have to think of the name of it. It's on Elmwood, I believe. So we're collecting those. So things that you never would have imagined somebody would use, you know, are recyclable.
That is awesome. Thank you for sharing. Really great. Yeah, and I see
Little
Melanie.
salmon. Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. That's a
All right.
zero waste store. It's on Lexington, just off of Elmwood.
Oh, okay.
So very cool. Great. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else before I switch back to my slides? Feel free to just jump in.
Hey, I'll add something. I can turn my camera on too. So for my conservation biology class, every year we do a poster session, and everyone picks a topic that has some local implications, and they have to come up with alternatives. Like, here's what you can do right here in Western New York to make a difference on this topic. And I learn something new every year and incorporate something that I've learned into my everyday life. And this year we're also doing a single-use plastic journal in an effort to try to eliminate at least one type of single-use plastic.
Nice. Is that something that gets shared through Canisius's website or something that other people could see some of those results?
Well, this year, again, will be a live poster session, and we do advertise it. It's open to anybody. So I'd be happy to share like the date and the information with you, and we would,
Great.
and you know, we'd welcome the community to come see our posters.
Wonderful. Very cool. Thanks for sharing. Excellent. Okay, anybody else? All right, if not, I'm going to go back to my slides. Just give me a second here. You know, I'm not great with technology. Okay, so talking to people about this. So I am going to give you a couple resources on the resource sheet that can be helpful in terms of learning how to talk about climate change in particular. The organization 350.org offers this, what they call a skill up program online, and this is, I really like them. They're interactive, and they do the kind of exercise that we just did, where you think about your circle of influence, but what they help you do is to basically develop your own climate story. So figuring out what you value, what your story is related to climate. So I find that resource particularly useful. You do have to give them your email address in order to participate, but you can, you know, unsubscribe if they start sending you newsletters if you don't want to receive them. There's another group called Climate Outreach, which has developed a couple of downloadable guides that you can read about how to talk about climate change. They came up with this little, what's this called, a mnemonic, about how to think about conversation about climate. So that's another good resource. Other things to think about that you could do would be holding some kind of a one-time event. So again, thinking about a book club session. There is a book out there called All We Can Save, which is a bunch of essays related to climate change, but they started something called the Circle Project, and they offer a whole bunch of online resources that you can use to have conversations about climate change. You don't have to use the book. You can just use the information that they offer online as sort of prompts and things to think about and consider for a book club or any sort of similar social club. You could hold a potluck and use this as an opportunity to talk about food as a big stuff topic. So you could say, everybody bring something plant-based or something local, and then use it to start a conversation about food and food waste. You also could hold a film screening. There's a bunch of good films out there related to climate change and some of the solutions that are being developed. I have done a film screening in particular before, and one thing I will say is after watching the film, I found that people who had come to watch it really did want to know more about solutions. So be sure to be ready, have some of the resources that we've provided you available for people to use after you hold your event. So in terms of tools to help you use your voice, we've talked a little bit about how to learn more about climate change, talked about how to start these conversations, but then the third piece is taking some action. So this is looking at action more on the more societal level side. So that's what we're going to talk about now. And not everybody is comfortable dressing up like a polar bear and going to a protest, but supporting organizations that are doing the work to research what are the policies we should have, what do we need to do to get to a sustainable planet, can be a really important climate action. And there's a whole bunch of groups out there that are working on climate change sort of at the national level, but there are some that are working on making change right here within New York State as well. So you may be able to find an organization that you feel comfortable learning from and then supporting. And in a lot of cases, that support can just come in the form of communicating. So sharing information, making phone calls, writing letters, again, trying to broaden that conversation to as many people as we can about what we need to do to get to where we need to be in terms of sustainability. Where you can make a difference. You can figure out what area is it related to climate change that gets you most motivated. How can you use your voice to make a difference? And that may involve talking to elected officials, which is, as you'll remember, I mentioned is one of the 3 evidence-based steps that have been shown to have a difference according to Count Us In. And they give some advice for how to start these conversations with elected officials. The first is to choose a topic that you feel passionately about, but also that your local representative can act on. So if you go to your town council and say, I want you to do something about the polar bears, you're probably not going to get very far. But if you go to your local councilman and say, hey, I heard that NYSERDA has resources and incentives available to help our town get some electric vehicle charging stations. That would be great for our downtown, could bring in some more visitors. You're more likely to get a result. And if you can make your request as smart as possible, you may have heard that acronym SMART before, the more results you may get. So you may say, I'd like you to, look at this information about what NYSERDA has out there and report on it at the next, board meeting. Something like that can be more likely to see some results than just being out there saying, hey, I just want you to do something about climate change. And arranging a conversation can sometimes be as easy as just calling up a local rep, but sometimes it can be more complicated. You may have to go to a meeting and ask for an opportunity to talk to them, to share resources with them about the topic that's of interest to you. There is something that everyone can do right now, and that is to comment on the New York State Climate Action Council's draft scoping plan. Some of you may have heard of this before. It is required by something called the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. This was a law that was passed in New York a couple of years ago that requires New York State to achieve some very ambitious climate goals in terms of reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. And the draft scoping plan is basically looks at different scenarios that will get us to those targets, get us to those emissions reduction targets. And so they're seeking feedback from the public, and they say specifically the mix of strategies and level of ambition that people would like to see New York State use to get to those emission targets. They are holding some public hearings. One will be in Buffalo in April. There will be 2 virtual sessions, and then there's several other meetings scheduled in other places across the state. But you can also just comment online. They're accepting public comments through June 10th. I will give you some links to find out more about the plan. And it's also, I think, important to let your elected officials know what you think about this plan. Some of what could come out of this scoping and end up in a final action plan may require some actions from the legislature. So it's really important for elected officials to know that their constituents are concerned about this and what you think about what New York State should be trying to do in this arena. And again, share your experience. Let other people know about the plan. Let them know if you've commented what you think about this particular plan. And I do want to remind everyone that this is a journey. So be sure to celebrate your accomplishments, and even the little things. You know, if you talk to your workplace and you're trying to get them to, you know, change where they're buying their electricity, but all you manage to do is to get the coffee club that's in the office to give you their coffee grounds to take home to compost, that's still an accomplishment. So be sure to celebrate any step that you're able to take. And remember, there's lots of different ways that we can get to sustainability. And be sure to share your experience again, and try to have a support network. So have somebody that you can talk to about frustrations that you may run into when you're trying to use your voice, as well as to celebrate any successes that you have. I can tell you that my college buddies that I showed on my little circle of influence have heard a lot about this sustainability series for me, and they've actually given me some good resources that I've been able to share with you. So, so having that support network can be really important.
There's a question in the chat.
Okay.
When you say let your elected official, is this the state assembly person, state senator, or both?
Both. So if there needs to be action taken by the legislature as a result of this plan. So what will happen is the scoping plan, once it's finalized, will then become basically an action plan, and then various New York State agencies will be required to write regulations for how this is going to be implemented. But there may be some actions that have to be taken by the state legislature as well to make that plan come to full reality. So it's important to let your state assembly person and your state senator both know what you think about the plan. Okay. So it's important to stay positive. The science is telling us it's not too late. You know, we can make a difference. We just all have to be pulling together on this topic. And I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. If I can, it's not letting me. There we go. And I'm going to switch over to show you the resource sheet. And again, feel free to ask me questions while I'm moving around here. Oh, and before I do that, I'm going to put a link to the resource sheet in the chat box. And if you're not comfortable, you know, retrieving a Google document, please let me know and I will send you a PDF of the resources as well. Hopefully this link will work this time. Okay. So hopefully everyone can see this. I need to go up to the top. Okay, so this is the resource sheet for becoming a voice. So it starts at the top with some resources to help you learn about climate change and what we need to do in terms of climate change. The first two links here are the Community Leadership and Community Protection Act, including the scoping plan and the meeting schedule. The plan itself is a pretty large document. But if you go to what's called the overview, there's this nice little document that it's a series of slides, but it gives you just an overview of what the CLCPA requires, and then it gets into how the scoping plan was developed and what's in the scoping plan. So it's a nice place to start versus the 200-page long scoping plan itself. There's also a schedule of when the hearings are being held around New York State. You can also get information on this page about how to submit your comments. Then the next section of the resource sheet is what I call the basics. So these are some good places to just learn about climate change, learn about the impacts of climate change on New York. I do want to point out this resource here, the Erie County Climate Brochure. This is a nice brief document. It's only 4 pages that Erie County put together that talks specifically about climate impacts in Western New York. So this could be a really positive, easy place to start in terms of understanding why climate change is important here in Western New York, what we need to be thinking and doing about it. So that's a nice resource that I like to point out. Then in terms of keeping up to date on what's going on with climate change, I do include those couple of news sites that I mentioned before. Then the next section gets into how to talk to others about climate change. The Skill Up training that I mentioned that can help you write your climate story is the first link. And then that's followed by several other documents that just give tips for how to talk to family and friends about climate change. The All We Can Save project circles that I mentioned, which are good if you're in a book club or in any sort of regular get together and talk club, moms groups, that kind of thing, is right there. There's also a video, if you prefer videos, that was done by a UB professor, actually, that sort of explains some tips about talking to climate change and some Western New York specific information. The next section is about taking action. So again, talking to elected officials. If you don't know who represents you in New York State, you can click on this link to find it. New York City has their own place where you can find New York City specific representation. There is a document that was developed in the UK about how to talk to elected officials, but a lot of the principles in it are universal in terms of how to think about having a discussion with your elected officials. Then the next 2 resources are a couple of programs that New York State has available to aid local communities in addressing climate. So you might want to check and see if your local community is already part of either one of these programs. And if not, that would be a great conversation to have with your local elected officials, because there is a lot of money and a lot of technical assistance available to help communities make some of these changes. I know Cheektowaga, which is where Rhinestone Woods is located, has taken advantage of several of these programs. So it's a good resource to talk to your local elected officials about. Then the second page is that list of organizations working on climate action, both in New York State and across the country. And at the very bottom, I just included a couple of faith-based resources. The Big Bold Jewish Climate Fest was something that just happened online in January. Even though it's over, it's just such an interesting concept, and they have some interesting videos. I left that on there. Green Faith, as some of you might remember, it's been in some of the other talks that I've given. It's sort of a clearinghouse for different faiths and who have some sort of climate movement going on. So those are just a couple. There's quite a few out there. Again, if you are in a particular denomination, look into that denomination, because you might be surprised at how much work is being done out there to help different churches make some changes. Does anybody have questions about any of these resources? Okay. If not, I'm almost done. I'm just going to share a couple more slides. So again, everybody's journey is going to be different, and setting a goal for completing your research, making some changes, having your voice be heard can be really positive. And I do want to mention too that I would love to hear back from people on how they felt about this series in particular. I will put a link in the chat, but I will also be sending out an email asking people to take a 7-question survey to just let us know what you thought of this series. We are going to be repeating the Sustainability 1.0 series on these 4 topics again in June. So any feedback we can get from people on what could improve any of the sessions that you may have attended, we would really appreciate. So I'm going to put that link in the chat right now and then open it up for anybody to share. If anybody else has a climate using your voice story that they want to share, please now is your time.
Can I actually ask a question?
Sure.
So I think like when talking to elected officials or like at an organizational level, I feel like the dynamic's a little different than influencing individuals, like kind of where you started.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think like the principles you outlined clearly apply across settings, but one thing I found is that people get really annoyed really fast. And I was just wondering if you had any tips to avoid like putting people off.
So you're saying like if you have a conversation with an elected official, they get annoyed?
No, sorry, I'm talking about like individual people. Elected officials are paid to not be annoyed with you.
Okay.
Private. I mean like
Okay.
individuals, like if you're working with, a social group or whatever. I've just found that like, even if you're trying to like not be judgy and let people be where they are and whatever, people feel judged, they get annoyed and sometimes even like push back and actually like dig in. And I'm just kind of wondering if you have any recommendations for getting around that.
Yeah, that's a really valid point. And I think some of it is just our inherent, I'm not a psychologist or anything, but I think there is sort of a psychology going on there that talking about climate change can be so scary that our brain's mechanism for dealing with it is to shut down and just pretend it's not happening. So I guess my first piece of advice would be if you think that that's going to be a scenario, then trying to have a conversation about a solution without ever mentioning the words climate change or sustainability might be a way to go. So again, approaching it from the economic benefits, because there are usually some economic benefits to making these changes. They're not always immediate, but they do happen in the long term. And then again, thinking back to those 3 steps, trying to figure out what's the value that they hold that I'm going to be able to connect with them on. So trying to find that way that you're going to find something that will connect with that person or that group. It might be worth some time to think about before you have the conversation. I don't know if that helps at all.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Anybody else? Go ahead, June. I see your hand up.
We've been doing some advocacy on a different issue with elected officials. And some of the training I've attended has said, try to find an area where the elected official has either signed on to a bill or is interested in a bill and compliment them on that. For example, we've used the current federal congressman. He did sign on to something to clean up Lake Erie. And so we approach him with that. We start with that. Thank you for supporting the bill regarding cleaning up Lake Erie and that kind of thing. That always kind of softens up people, is what we've found. And
that's a really good point.
Go on to your story and what you're looking for from them. So it's, and I think that can be transferred with individuals as well. I mean, you can just say, well, you're really careful about your garden, or you seem to recycle really well, you know, to get them to talk more.
Great idea. It's the old-fashioned cookie approach, you know, you put the positive at the beginning and the end. So yeah, great idea. Thank you. Anybody else have anything they want to share? Okay. Well, if not, thank you all again for taking so much time to learn a little bit and to grow. Hopefully, I hope your journey continues to go really well. I do appreciate you you taking the time again, and I would appreciate everybody taking the time to fill out the survey, which unfortunately it looks like I only sent to one person instead of everyone. So let me send it to everyone in the chat. And again, I will send it out in an email too. So if you miss it in the chat, but hopefully you can get some good feedback and continue on your journey. Oh, and I see Malini did put another comment about looking up records of elected officials can be helpful, looking at their press releases to find those things like June mentioned that you can thank them for and give them a positive kudos for. So great. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
At the research page link also did not send. Are you going to email that to everyone?
Yeah, let me see if I can grab it now and I'll put that. I'll email both, but I'll throw it in the chat right now again. Sorry about that. I didn't realize I wasn't sending to everyone when I sent it. So hopefully people can grab that and copy that before they sign off too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.